Love, love, love till I be but breath of the Spirit flowing in me.
Hello, welcome to Spirit of Life. I'm Geraldine Lee, your host, and our guest is Petranel Ferrao. Welcome to Spirit of Life, Petranel.
Thank you, Geraldine.
Yeah, it's great to have you, and yeah, I'd love to hear about your faith journey.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yes. So, how did you get touched by God in your life?
I suppose I've had a range of different things throughout my faith journey, but most recently I've been touched really through prayer and being prayed with in my life. So my faith journey started, I suppose, through the family. I was born into a traditional Catholic family and had a very traditional upbringing. And it was actually very good because the foundation was there for my family, not just my parents but my grandparents as well on both sides, who were both very, all four of them were very faith-filled people and very religious as well. And it wasn't just a commitment of a day-to-day thing. They actually did have a relationship with God, and for me that was actually a very good experience to have while I was growing up. As in most cases, as one grows up, you sort of tend to ask your own questions and try to discover what is real about your faith. And as most young people do, they'll try and find different tracts and read different books and discuss various things about their faith.
And how old were you then when you were?
I suppose I started to question what was real in my high school years. I went to a Catholic high school. It was run by the Dominican sisters in North Adelaide, and I was in year 12, as part of our religious education, we were encouraged to go through all the different other Christian churches and learn a little bit about their teachings and all the other faiths as well. We were encouraged about that, and through that I started to think about religion and my faith and where the two met, because for me faith is more of an individual thing and a relationship with God. And I suppose I was led down various tracks, and being sort of very curious in my nature, I went to different things and talked to different people and read different books. But the one event in my life, I suppose, which stood out was when I was prayed over the first time. I was always involved in music. My mum was the church musician, and so I was part of music and singing while I was fairly young, and she was invited to be the musician for a Life in the Spirit course, and there was a healing mass that was run as part of the Life in the Spirit seminar, and she asked me if I would like to come along to that and sing along with the rest of the group, and I went along to it. And at the end of the healing mass we were invited to come up and be prayed on if that was what we felt inclined to do. And during that time I was undergoing a few health issues, and I thought I'd go up and pray and have prayer for healing. And I went up for prayer. I wasn't really sure what to expect, but for me that was when there was a very big transformation in terms of how I was able to sense God's love. It was a very overwhelming experience for me emotionally, and I suppose I would not do it justice if I were to try and explain it in words as such, but what I can do is probably give you an analogy of moving from perhaps watching a television in maybe black and white and in 2D and with subtitles where there's no sound, to watching the same thing but in 3D high definition stereo with all the colours, and being very much within the whole I suppose program that you're watching. So it was a change of my faith from being very two-dimensional and black and white to being very exciting and very overwhelming on an emotional level. So yeah, and I suppose that's the closest analogy I can get to. Yeah.
Is it like your experience God? I mean, you knew God through your parents, like you knew of His character, and then it became very real through this.
Yeah, so I think
through being prayed with.
That's right. It went from a thinking to a feeling. So I knew God, and I knew He loved me, but this was the first time I deeply felt His love within every part of my being. And I still get emotional when I talk about it now, because it was a very profound experience for me. And since then, I think I didn't need to question anything about my faith anymore, because it was so real and so profound. And the sense that I had was such an immense amount of love, of God's love for me through that prayer. And it was quite unusual, because I had actually gone up requesting prayer for physical healing, but what I experienced was something spiritual, on a much different level. Yeah, it was very much a spiritual and emotional.
And you stopped you felt to stop the exploring once you had that experience? I
did, yeah. And at that point in time, because I had only just gone to a healing mass, I decided I would partake in a Life in the Spirit seminar that my mum had actually been invited to. So I did the Life in the Spirit seminar the next time it was run as part of the Henley Beach parish in Adelaide. And for me, it changed a lot of things, because I learned to, I suppose, experience God's love every day in my life through that seminar. And I became a lot more actively involved in prayer with others as well, and through the group. So I ended up joining the Living Waters prayer group at Henley Beach, and became part of the ministry there, the music ministry as well as the prayer ministry. So it was a turning point for me in terms of my faith journey, and I did stop exploring. I also sought, I suppose, spiritual guidance in terms of discernment for, what were the right paths. And I remember, I think it was Father Michael, who was his MSc priest at that time at Henley Beach. He used to be very kind and do our healing masses for us. And he said to me, a good
I might need to interrupt you, but I'd love to hear more about Father. But
sure.
We need to go for a break now. You've been watching Spirit of Life. We'll be back in a few minutes. Stay with us. Hello, welcome back to Spirit of Life. My name is Geraldine Lee, and our guest is Petranel Ferrao. Welcome back, Petranel.
Thanks, Geraldine.
Yeah, you've been sharing about Father Michael, and he was quite significant in your spiritual journey. Could you tell us more about Father Michael?
Yeah, he said a few things which I think have stayed with me throughout my faith journey. One of the things I had gone to him for a little bit of advice on spiritual discernment and deciding in terms of what's right and what's wrong. And one of the things he explained to me was when you're discerning anything, he asked me to decide whether that was bringing me closer to God's love, whether it was actually deepening my faith and strengthening my relationship with God, and whether it was also strengthening my relationship with others, where it was a more peaceful, harmonious relationship with others.
You used that during your exploration about different Christian faiths, didn't you?
Just exploration in general about faith and beliefs and ideas and teachings, and trying to discern what's right and what's wrong. I think a lot of us go through that process of trying to work out for ourselves what feels right and what feels wrong. And his guidance was very apt for me at the time, and has actually led to my movement to explore more the Ignatian spirituality side of things, which I suppose is along the same line of discernment and trying to understand God's movement in your life and trying to find God in all things.
I'm aware that you went through some illness and the Ignatian spirituality helped you.
Yes, I've had illness throughout my adult life, and in the early times when I've struggled with the illness, I've always seen it as a time of like trial and hardship and going through difficulty. And recently, as part of the Ignatian spirituality, we're encouraged to do the awareness examine daily. Now, that's just a little bit of a reflection at the end of the day in terms of trying to thank God for the day, thank God for the experiences, but also to go through each of the experiences and try to understand which ones we felt the most closeness to God and where we felt God's love the most, versus experiences where we felt God's love the least or the least connected to Him. And then also to try and line up in terms of how God's working in our lives through the day and then through the weeks, etc. And through that, I suppose contemplating days of when I have gone through illness recently, I've had quite an amazing turnaround in terms of how I see illness, because when I've reflected on days where I have had a bit of pain or have been unwell, I've actually realised that they were days of consolation. So I'm probably using words that is also through Ignatian teaching, but times of consolation, I suppose, where you feel connected to God and more connected to others, and you're feeling at peace, and the desolation is the opposite to that, where you're sort of inward looking. Everything's a little bit more negative. You're not really reaching out to others, and it not feeling as much at peace. That's just my take on it. There's obviously a deeper understanding about desolation and consolation.
How did you put it into practice when you're in pain to feel consoled?
Yeah, so because through the awareness I've realised that during times of illness, where I've actually realised there were times of consolation, I felt that I've had the opportunity to rest physically, and through that I've actually had the opportunity to feel at peace and spend more time with God. And I suppose through the illness, because I have a lot of prayer support from friends and family, I also feel a lot more connected to those who are praying for me and sometimes praying with me. And that's why through the process I've realised that even illness can be times of consolation, and perhaps there's a purpose in all things, rather than us just seeing things as good or bad. So there can be good that comes out of things that are hard as well.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I know a friend who suffered cancer, and she felt the prayers of everyone, and she felt carried. Almost.
Definitely. Yeah, I've experienced that too, especially where I've been acutely ill sometimes and I've asked for a lot of prayer. I've actually really felt the support of everyone's prayer in terms of being lifted into God's care, and everyone lifting me in prayer.
Yeah, that's inspiring, because I mean, some people through suffering turn away from God, don't they?
It is quite easy to do, because I think you can question why you're going through it, and why me, and is there a reason for this? Why is it happening again? Or I thought I was healed the first time. So it's very easy to sort of think that the process is too difficult. And I suppose when I mean, as being human, I've sort of gone through that as well. But I think we don't always understand the spiritual reasons behind some of the physical things we go through.
Yes, and I suppose you've made a conscious choice to focus on God. Some people make a conscious choice to be more negative, haven't you?
It obviously, pain is not an easy thing to deal with, and illness is not an easy thing to deal with. There's a lot of I work in the cancer field, as you know, and so the prevalence of cancer these days is quite high. Most people have been touched by
cancer,
or by someone in their family or amongst their friends who have actually been through the illness, and it's not a difficult time, especially the whole treatment. Obviously the diagnosis, there's a lot of shock and trauma associated with that. There's also then the whole process of the treatment and everything, which is quite
Yes.
takes its toll, not just physically but emotionally and mentally. It's quite exhausting, not just on the patient itself, but also on their supporting family members and friends, etc. So
Yes, cancer is a very difficult, painful time. Yep, and we may need to go for a break now. You've been watching Spirit of Life. Stay with us, and we'll be back in a few minutes.
Go till I be but breath of the Spirit flowing in me. Go till I be but breath of the Spirit flowing in me.
Hello, welcome back to Spirit of Life. My name is Geraldine Lee, your host, and our guest is Petranel Ferrao. She's been sharing about her faith journey and how her struggles with illness has led her closer to God. Welcome back, Petranel.
Thanks, Geraldine.
You were sharing about how you had gone through suffering, and you can feel for others, especially those who've had cancer. What are some ways that you coped through your illness?
Yeah, I suppose because my illness is more a chronic type rather than an acute, which is something like cancer, and it's been a good experience because it's actually allowed me to try and explore areas that will help me during those times, and through that I've been led to some of the Ignatian exercises. So one of them is guided imagery meditation. So I'm not sure of how many people are familiar with it, but it's basically just a meditation on a scripture passage where you try and imagine yourself within that passage, and you you imagine that you're in there and basically talking to Jesus or interacting with Jesus within that passage. So I'll give you an example. One of the passages in Matthew where Jesus calls Peter to walk towards him during the storm when he's afraid. And I've gained a lot through doing a meditation with that scripture because it's a very useful one during times of fear and anxiousness or uncertainty, or when you're feeling just overwhelmed with the storms that occur in your life. And through the imagery, one of the resources I use is a tape. It's a CD from Norma Woodcock that sort of takes you through the guided imagery in an Ignatian manner, and she sort of leads you to be in that boat where the storms come about suddenly and you're feeling overwhelmed and quite stressed and anxious, and then it leads you to start to look to Jesus, and then where Jesus calls you instead of Peter to come to him, and then you walk towards Jesus, and then when you do take your focus off Jesus and focus on the storm, you start to sink. But the moment you keep your focus on Jesus, you are fine, and he sort of can lift you out of that sinking feeling. And I think
it's a great
it's a very, very powerful method of actually going through your trust in Jesus during times of turmoil or when the storms in your life occur. And for me, it's been a great resource to be able to do that meditation, because it's a way of really connecting to Jesus and through the meditation. And I find it's a very powerful way of meditating. And every time I do the same scripture meditation, I have a different experience, because obviously the storm in your life or the fear or your anxiety at that time is for a different reason.
I would like to try that. That's very powerful. Is it like visualization, New Age kind of thing, or what are its roots?
It's definitely not a New Age. It's a very old age method. So Christian meditation has been around for a very long time. It's actually based on meditating on scripture and meditating on passages from the Bible where you actually connect to Jesus in that passage, and it's a guided imagery where you're guided through to imagine yourself within that scene of the gospel passage.
And is it Ignatius, like Saint Ignatius? What did he experience that created this method?
So I find a lot of the Ignatian teachings very powerful. So that might be a personal thing, because I'm actually quite a visual sort of person. I like the arts, I like creativity, and the Ignatian's teachings, because I think he went through a big conversion, and he was part of the world and experienced his own doubts and went through. And prior to his conversion, he was obviously, fairly wealthy, and during his conversion was also convalescing from his injury. Some of his teachings actually speak to me quite vividly, and also some of the resources that are available through his teachings that are very powerful for me, because they really help me to connect to Jesus through those techniques. So
Yes.
meditation is obviously one of the key ones used. Yeah.
Yes, and you were also saying about with science, and like that part of your faith has been having the challenge of trying to work things out and maybe not working it out. Like
That's another reason why I do like the Ignatian spirituality, because it brings out your creative side. It encourages art and music, and although my daily job is as a scientist, I really love the creative arts. I love art, and I love music, and doing those things as well, to just take away from the whole thinking process and moving towards more the feeling process, I suppose, is a great way of connecting to God again.
Yes, and you were telling me a story earlier about the child. About the mystery and the child in the beach?
Oh, that's right, yeah. So I suppose that's part of moving from the thinking to the feeling, because being a scientist, and I think I was always like this as a little child. I was always curious and asking a lot of questions, and often I think my grandfather used to tell my mum this story, and my mum used to tell me this story. It's one about Saint Augustine, who is walking along the beach, and he's trying to work out the Trinity and the complexity of the Trinity, and he sees this little boy who's dug a little hole in the beach, and he's running back and forth where he's got a bucket, and he's just filling it up and emptying it into the hole, and he's keeping on doing this repeatedly. And St. Augustine stops and asks him, what are you doing? And the little boy says, well, I'm actually trying to empty the ocean into this little hole on the beach. And St. Augustine says to him, I don't think that's very possible. Have you seen the size of the ocean? And I don't think you're going to be able to get all of that into this little well. And the little boy turns to him and says, well, you're trying to figure out the Trinity. So it's a very good analogy
yes.
again of us trying to work out things that are a lot more than just us.
Yeah, no, it's been wonderful, because it's true that mystery, we sometimes can't answer anything, but we need to leave it to God. But
it's trusting.
Yes,
yeah.
but it's been great having you, and your story has been very inspiring for me. I'm just looking forward to read the Bible and imagine myself in there. And so I wish you all the best, and I'd like to have you back next week. It'll be great to have you, and we can hear more about your story.
Thanks, Geraldine.
And wish you all the best for the week.
Thank you.
You've been watching Spirit of Life. Join us again next week. Goodbye, and God bless you.